I have the great privilege of introducing Dr. Jeff Hoffman, whose works you've just seen on the film. And his bio is in the front of this program, so I won't take too long, but I do want to give you a sense of his accomplishments. He is currently the professor of the practice at MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics and director of the Massachusetts Space Grant Consortium. He is a former NASA astronaut, as you saw, and he's made 5 space shuttle missions. Now, to put that into perspective, there are approximately 7.2 billion people on this planet, and only 32 of them, that's 0.0000004%, have made 5 or more trips into space. That is an infinitesimally small number of people, and we happen to have one of them standing here with us today. Thank you. Between 1979 and 1997, he logged more than 1,211 hours and more than 21.5 million miles in space. He has served on many missions that you saw there in the movie. He has served as the NASA European representative from 1997 to 2001. Academically, he has a BA in astronomy from Amherst College. He has an MS in materials science from Rice University. He has a PhD in astrophysics from Harvard. I know there are lots of scouts today in the audience, and I wanted you to know that he is an Eagle Scout and that he puts that in his bio, so you should be proud of your scouting. And I wanted to talk a little bit about his specialization and research interests, which include human space flight operations, space flight technology, human-machine interactions, extravehicular activity, and conducting laboratory research in space. As you know, he teaches at MIT, and in his teaching, he focuses in particular in his interests of space system design and space policy. In order to make this day happen, we gathered an enormous number of enthusiastic supporters and workers. And I wanted to direct your attention to page 24 of the program, where you will find them all listed. But because of the limits of time, I'll mention but a few now. First and foremost, our partner in this endeavor is the Wellesley Education Foundation, who had the confidence and vision to help take this forward. They are an excellent organization working to fund a wide range of K through 12 public school initiatives here in Wellesley through a grants process where teachers and staff request grants and the organization decides in partnership which will be funded. I do put in a pitch that if you see those envelopes come in or you see the Red Apple program, please pay attention. This is the way that we can get private funding into the public schools and make a real difference for cutting edge and special programs that make a difference in our public schools. I'd really like to reach out and thank our corporate sponsors, and we offer them a deep and gracious welcome and appreciation for being our inaugural funders on this initiative. We have Cisco, Patriot Renewables, Biogen IDEC Foundation, Intex, MathWorks, Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thank you so much for believing in us from the get-go. Next, I want to thank the school system itself, and in particular our superintendent, Dr. Lucier, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Dr. Dean Blaze, and their staffs. And additionally, the entire science, math, and technology faculty throughout the district, who gave us invaluable input, and many of whom gave extracurricular or extra credit to students today to be here and to assist, as well as to attend the expo. And lastly, I'd really like to reach out and thank Katie Geringer, whose modesty precludes her from taking the credit she is due. She has acted as our chair for the past 14 or so months and gotten us to this point. Thank you, Katie, and thanks to the members of the organizing committee, as well as to all of the volunteers, particularly students, who did the heavy lifting to get us to this day. We estimate, thanks. Just to give you an idea, we estimate that more than 2,000 people have attended today. They've seen over 75 interactive exhibits and participated in 12 workshops, a speaker series, and after this there will be a Meet the STEM professional for teens and their families to meet people in a wide range of STEM professions and learn how to network and potentially consider this as a career path including ancillary fields like law, public relations, and advertising, which often go hand in hand with the STEM fields. I really hope you enjoy the talk today. There will be a time for question and answers, and thank you again so much for coming.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Nice to be here at Wellesley High School. I've actually been here on a few occasions. I have two nephews, one of whom actually already graduated and is now an airline pilot flying for Delta Regional. And the other nephew is actually a senior and will be going to Cornell University next year. Wellesley is a very fine school system, and I think it's really extraordinary the work that people have gone to put together this STEM Expo. And I'm absolutely delighted to see so many young people here. Looking at the young kids in the audience, I would like a show of hands. How many of you would like someday to travel into space? All right, I see lots of hands. That's good. Let me tell you what we're going to do today. Of course, all of my space flights were on the Space Shuttle, and most of you are probably aware that the Space Shuttle was retired a couple of years ago. Summer of 2011 was its final 135th flight. We had 5 shuttle orbiters. And so at the moment, all US astronauts are flying to space on Russian rockets, and they go up to the International Space Station. I had actually volunteered back when I was an active astronaut to fly on a Russian rocket. It turns out I'm about 3 inches too tall to fit into their space capsule. So all of my flights were on the Space Shuttle. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, try to give you an idea of how complicated it is to get ready for a space flight. And that is both the equipment we use, that is how do we get a rocket ready to fly in space, and then how does the crew train. And then I'm going to show you a little bit about what it's like actually to be in space, what happens when you take a space flight. And finally, since, as I said, the US Space Shuttle has been retired, but we have several companies now which are developing new types of spaceships, and I want to show you a few pictures of them just to give you an idea of what you might see 5 or 10 years from now flying in space. And if some of you do get a chance to go in space, these are some of the vehicles you might be flying on. So let's get started with how do we prepare a spaceship to fly in space. And of course, I'm going to be talking about the Space Shuttle because that's the spaceship that I know. As I said, I never flew with the Russian spaceship. For NASA spaceships, the action is down in Florida at the Kennedy Space Center. This is the big, we call it the Vehicle Assembly Building. It was actually built back in the 1960s when we were going to the moon with the big Saturn rockets. It's a huge building. It was then used for 30 years to take care of the space shuttles after they land and getting them ready for flight. And it will be used for future vehicles that are coming along. So let's take a look very briefly at what happened to a space shuttle after it landed, coming back from orbit after spending 2.5 weeks or so in space. First of all, we roll it over to the hangar. And once it's inside the hangar, it is well, you get some sense here looking at all that scaffolding. There's hundreds of people now crawling all over the shuttle. They completely take it apart to make sure that nothing is broken on its last trip, because remember, the Space Shuttle was a reusable vehicle. We flew it many, many times. We made 135 space flights with only 5 shuttles. And so that's an average of about 27 flights per shuttle. Some made more, some made less. This is the inside when they open up the doors to the cargo bay. You can see the robotic arms, and they have to take whatever was in the shuttle out and get ready to put what's going to go in for the next flight. They take all the 3 main engines out. They want to check them, make sure that they're in good working order before we commit again to use them. One of the things that's amazing inside this hangar, it's on the scale of a Navy shipyard. It's huge, and yet you have to treat it with the cleanliness that you do inside a laboratory, which is why everybody is wearing these white coats. And with the space shuttle, one of the most difficult things was taking care of all the thermal protection ceramic tiles. You know, when we come back from space through the atmosphere, and I'll show you a picture of that a little later, it gets very, very hot, thousands of degrees on the outside of the shuttle. And without these tiles, the shuttle is made of aluminum, like most spaceships. And the aluminum would just melt, and you would never get back to Earth. It takes about 3 months minimum to clean up the shuttle, get it ready to fly again. And then finally, we roll it out of the hangar. And there you can see they had to cut a special hole in the door to make room for the vertical tail. And we roll it over to that big vehicle assembly building, into the building. And now it gets really exciting. I want you to watch this because they hook up a big crane to the shuttle and they lift it up off the ground. And I have to tell you, to see a big space shuttle, which is the size of a commercial airplane, to actually see it get lifted off the ground and hauled up to the top of that building. By the way, they test these cranes very carefully before they put the shuttle on. You do not want to drop a space shuttle, okay? So we take it over, and in the meantime, previously, there's actually other parts to the shuttle system. That big orange tank holds the fuel for the space shuttle, and then those 2 white booster rockets are what help us get off the ground in the first place. And we lower the shuttle onto that, and we hook it up, and there we actually make the connections. That's an explosive bolt that you can see right over here, so that when we actually get up into space and we're not firing our engines anymore, then we explode that bolt and the tank comes off, and the tank actually burns up in the atmosphere and the shuttle stays up in space. The shuttle is put on top of a mobile launch platform and then rolled out of the building out towards the launch pad, which is a couple of miles away. Sometimes it gets foggy. I really like this picture. It's kind of a spooky picture of, you know, where are we going? On the ground, you couldn't see anything, but of course from the air you had a nice picture. And then up the hill to the launch pad, and finally, there we are. There's still a lot of work to do because a lot of the hazardous systems, there's a lot of nasty chemicals and things, different kinds of rocket fuel, and they don't get put on until we're on the launch pad. Here's one of my favorite pictures. You can sort of see the rainbow coming down, and there was actually another shuttle on the other launch pad. So it's, and then of course the Atlantic Ocean on the right. So that very briefly gives you some idea of how you prepare a spaceship for flight. And as I say, it's very complex, and you don't want to cut any corners because the amount of power that you have to harness in order to get into space is huge. You'll see a picture of a launch later. And if anything goes wrong with that, it can get really bad in a hurry. So you want to check everything 2 or 3 times and make sure that all of your equipment is ready to fly. And the crew has to get ready to fly. So here I am with one of my 5 crews. Now, when people think about astronaut training, I know a lot of people think about, oh, they send you off into the jungle to learn about survival training and water survival, and they put you underwater and simulators and all of that. And all of that is true. You do spend time doing that, but in fact, when you show up as a new astronaut, the first thing they do is they hand you a huge pile of books, and they say, go read this. It's like being back at school again. And if you look here, you'll notice it's not only the NASA books, but now we're flying in partnership with the Russian space agency, so we have to learn all about the Russian equipment, and space is really international. Up on the International Space Station, we have part of it is made by the Europeans, and part is made by the Japanese, and part is made by Canadians. And so as astronauts, you have to learn all these different systems, so there really is a lot of studying don't think that your studying is finished when you finish school, kids, because you're going to be studying for a lot longer because when you learn how to do new things. But once we learn the basics, then we do actually go out into the simulators. Here you can see a shuttle simulator, which we no longer need. That's off in a museum now up in Washington State. This is the space station simulator, and by going in there, we can actually practice the sorts of things that we'll be doing when we get up into space, and that's very important. We use a lot of virtual reality because we can simulate what it looks like being in space, and it's a lot less expensive, of course, to do it in virtual reality than using some other types of simulators or going underwater. But we do that as well, especially when we're training to put on spacesuits and do spacewalks, because a spacesuit weighs several hundred pounds. And if I were wearing a spacesuit here, I couldn't even walk around. I mean, it's just so heavy. So when you go into the water, the spacesuit is full of air. It kind of wants to float up to the top, and so you put lead weights in the chest and the arms and the legs so that you don't float, but you don't sink either. And so you really have the feeling that you're up in space. And as you heard in the movie that was shown a little while ago, in getting ready for the Hubble Space Telescope rescue mission, we spent about 400 hours underwater. So it's very valuable training. We can, for very short periods of time, make ourselves weightless by getting in a NASA airplane, which flies like a roller coaster pattern. And every time you go over the top, if you've been in roller coasters, you might know how you feel like your stomach is sort of coming up. And we do that over and over again. And so for periods of about 20 or 25 seconds, you really are weightless and you're floating around inside the plane. And we use that to test out equipment and practice our procedures. We spend a lot of time flying in high-performance training jets, and about a month before our launch, we all fly down to Florida for a dress rehearsal. And here's our crew on the dress rehearsal. And what we do is we get into the shuttle, we get dressed in our launch suits, and we go up into the shuttle, we get strapped into the seats, and we do a practice countdown together with the launch control team in the Launch Control Center at the Kennedy Space Center. And then at T0, we simulate that we had a problem, and so we don't actually launch, and then we get practice in how to escape, because there's a lot of explosive material around the launch pad, and if you have a danger that there might possibly be a fire or an explosion, you want to get out of there in a hurry, right? So we get in these little baskets, and you can see they're on a wire, and that wire goes all the way down to the bottom, and you sort of, you cut yourself loose, you slide all the way down, and when you get to the bottom, then you have a choice. You can either, you get out of the cart, you can either run into an underground bunker and close yourself in until the situation is safe, or they have parked nearby an armored personnel carrier, which we can get in and drive away as fast as we can to a place where a helicopter can pick us up. And so we actually have to practice learning how to drive a tank, which is really fun, I have to tell you. We take it out on the beach and drive it up over the sand dunes, and one or two people always try to get it stuck, and well, anyway, it's pretty cool. And they also teach us about fighting fires. So, because you can have a fire on the launch pad, and if you know how to use a hose properly, then you can use that to make an escape path. So there are some of these fun things, but really we spend most of our time studying and practicing, because there's just so many things. Just as an example, there's 2,000 switches and buttons in the space shuttle. And you have to know what every single one of them does, not only when they work properly, because we only spend about 10% of our time learning how to use things when they work properly. The rest of our time we spend trying to figure out all the things that might go wrong and understand what it is that we should do. Well, then, this was our dress rehearsal a month before launch. We go back to Houston, do some final training, and then a month later we come back to Florida. And now you notice we are sort of all by ourselves, whoops, over there, because we are in medical quarantine. They don't want us to be exposed to any common colds or flu. We do get to see our family and a few close friends, but they have to be checked out by the doctors first. And it's very nice. NASA gives us a little house on the beach that we can use to relax and just get in the mood. And the night before the launch, they light up the shuttle. It's very beautiful. We get up early in the morning, have a not a very big breakfast, I have to say. Go over, get into our launch suits. These are actually pressure suits on the inside, and the orange material on the outside protects you from fire and hazardous chemicals. And then we walk out to the vehicle that will take us out to the launch, and there we are, getting close. Often people ask me at this point, what's going through your mind? You're about ready to strap yourself onto several million pounds of high explosives. Why would you want to do something like that? Well, I have to say, I had wanted to fly in space ever since I was 6 years old. And I followed the early space program with great interest. All the early astronauts were pretty much military test pilots, and I wasn't really interested in that. But when the space shuttle came along, the space shuttle has a crew of 7, and you only need 2 pilots, like in a regular airplane. So that meant that NASA started looking for a lot more scientists, engineers, medical doctors. And as soon as I heard that, I applied, and I was lucky enough to get selected. And so what was going through my mind at this point, before my first flight, was, this is not the time to be thinking, do I want to do this or not? I had made that decision back when I was 6 years old. I was going to strap myself in and sit back and relax and enjoy the flight, which I did. It's really quite a flight. You get to the launch pad, you take the elevator up. The access is, you can see here through this little, we call it the white room, and inside the white room we have just a few technicians are the only people left on the launch pad except for the crew. And they help us just put on our final pieces of clothing. They strap us in, then they close. This is the door of the space shuttle. That's the hatch you can see back there. They close us in, then they leave. They pull away the white room, and the next thing you know, you are all by yourself, and there's nobody else up there, and the countdown is going on. And as you get down to the last 9 minutes or so, the space shuttle really starts to come alive. They turn on the pumps, and you can feel the rumbling underneath you. And at about 6 seconds, the main engines come on, and what happens is, what you can see here, hopefully this is, so you can see the water flow to protect the launch pad. There come the main engines. And then in 6 seconds, the solid boosters will fire, and we're on our way. And there we go. And I have to tell you, at this point, it's shake, rattle, and roll. I mean, we are vibrating. The vibration is incredible. And the noise, we really can't do it justice with the sound system we have here. If you're there in person, they don't let anybody watch from closer than about 3 miles away, but you can feel the ground shake and the vibrations when they hit you in the chest. It's an incredible feeling of power. We call it riding the fire. I think you can, for obvious reasons, see it. And what's amazing, you're going straight up. So you look out the window, and there's the ground is just falling away from you. And straight up, in about 45 seconds, you break the sound barrier. That's the sonic boom. You can see these waves up here. That's as we're breaking the sound barrier. And if you think things were shaking a lot when you left the ground, wait until you go through Mach 1. I mean, on my first flight, it was shaking so much, I really thought the wings were going to come off. I thought something must be wrong. It can't be shaking this much. But in fact, everything was okay, and we survived, and I'm here to tell the tale. And it's amazing that it only takes about 8.5 minutes to get into orbit. And of course, once you're up in orbit, you are above the sky. This is a telephoto picture. You can see the different layers of the atmosphere, which when you go out on a nice day when there's not clouds and you look up at we call it the big blue sky. It's almost a cliche in our language, but When you look at it from space, the sky is not so big. It only goes up about 20, 30 miles, and then you're basically in space. Really, space is closer than New York City, when you think about it. In order to stay up there, though, you have to be going really, really fast, about 18,000 miles an hour if you want to stay in orbit, and that's why we have these powerful engines and the big external fuel tank. Once we get into orbit, then I told you we blow those explosive bolts here and in the back that are holding the shuttle on, and that tank, fuel tank, falls back and burns up. That's the only part of the shuttle system that was not reused. So when you're in space, there is this, people ask, well, what's it like to be in space? That's probably the most common first question that I get whenever people find out that I'm an astronaut and that I've been in space. Well, there's a huge change in the perspective of when you're looking back at the Earth. This is the Straits of Gibraltar that you see here, the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean, Africa, Europe. When you fly in an airplane, you can look out the windows and see entire cities spread out below you. From an orbiting spacecraft, you can see entire continents. I love the mountains. Here is the Himalayas with the Indian subcontinent at the left and the Tibetan highlands up here. And then people ask me, well, you say you're going 18,000 miles an hour. I mean, that's pretty fast. That's 5 miles every second. Think about it. You could be from here to Boston in about 4 seconds. No traffic jams on the Pike or anything. But you don't have any sense of how fast you're going because there's no wind, there's no noise, there's no vibration. But some of you may recognize San Francisco Bay. Here's the Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco, and you fly over San Francisco, and then 10 minutes later, everybody recognizes this, I hope, you're over Cape Cod, and so you know, even though it doesn't feel like you're going fast, you know that if you can go from San Francisco to Cape Cod in 10 minutes, man, you are going fast. And then you keep going across the Atlantic, and there's the UK and Ireland. That's sort of what it looks like. People also want to know, what does it feel like? Well, the crazy thing about being in space is you're orbiting around the Earth, you're in a constant state of free fall, you have no weight. I don't want to say that there's no gravity, because there actually is gravity out in orbit. If there weren't, we'd go flying off, and we wouldn't be going around the Earth, we'd just go flying off in a straight line. But you're falling around the Earth, the spaceship, so you're actually floating inside the spaceship. And all of the things inside our head that normally tell us which direction is up don't function anymore. So here I am with my eyes closed, floating. Am I upside down? Am I right side up? You have no way of knowing. And that actually, in about 2/3 of the people who go up, produces some forms of what we call space sickness. I say no more. You can... I was pretty fortunate. I never suffered from it. But by the way, there's no correlation between people who get seasick and airsick and people who get space sick. Other things happen to your body. The first feeling you have when you become weightless is like you're upside down, because gravity is no longer pulling your blood down into your legs, so a lot of liquid flows from your lower body to your upper body, including getting into your spinal column and filling up the discs between the vertebrae and your spinal cord. And here we're measuring each other's height. I'm 6'2" here. That's already, as I said, 3 inches too tall to fly with the Russians. But up in space, I'm 6'4". There are, if some of you have been in Europe, visited dungeons in European castles, they have these machines that can make you grow a little bit longer. Not considered a very pleasant experience, and actually there's a fair amount of low back pain the first few days in space because of this phenomena. So between the headaches from having too much fluid in your head, it's like hanging upside down for hours at a time. You do develop a headache and a backache. So quite a few aspirins and Motrins get popped the first few days, but humans are remarkably adaptable, and after a few days, nearly everybody is feeling comfortable and just having a great time floating and just enjoying being in space. Here, people always ask, what do we eat? Well, this is people's conception of astronaut food. This is what it was like back in, 40, 50 years ago in the early days of space flight. I have to say, it's a lot better nowadays. We have meals ready to eat that's actual real food. We do eat a lot of dehydrated food, not too much different from what you might take on a backpacking trip. Of course, the table and seating arrangements are a little bit different and then the other question that I always get asked is, well, what do you do if you have to, after you've eaten and had a drink, then you've got to go to the bathroom? And sure enough, we've got one up on the spaceships, and it's about the size of the bathroom in a typical airplane. The biggest difference is that you see these two bars here. Those are thigh restraint bars. They're on springs. So after you sit down on the seat, you have to put those thigh bars over your thighs so that they hold you down, because you don't want to go floating up off the seat when you're... All right, you get the point. I can see that. That's enough said. Sleeping arrangements. This is about the size of a good-sized coffin, I would say. But since you're floating, you really don't need that much extra space. And so it's really... I slept very well up in space. It is a remarkable experience, psychologically, spiritually, as well as physically and visually. This is the moon and Jupiter and the Earth's atmosphere. I mentioned before I love the mountains, and there's actually a lot of similarities, I think, in some ways between mountain climbing and space flight, in the sense that you have to take a certain risk and work hard to get up to the summit, to the high ground. But once you're up there, there is this feeling of isolation, of a clarity, of a new perspective on things, of a view. And the thing about space is it's higher than the highest mountaintop, and so those feelings are exaggerated. I just want to point out to you, what you're seeing here is the sun. Now, I don't want you to concentrate on the rays coming out, because that's an artifact of the camera. But there's something about this picture of the sun that none of you have ever seen before, because you're seeing the sun in a black sky. Every time you've seen the sun, it's in a blue sky, because that's the atmosphere. We see the stars at night in a black sky, but when you're up in space, you actually see the sun as a star. Of course, it's close to us, so it's bigger and brighter than the other stars, but just another example of the complete change in perspective when you go into space. And we try in words and images to convey the wonder of being weightless, of not having to carry your body weight around. It's almost impossible to truly share the experience, though, because it is so unique. We try to show it in pictures. One of my crewmates was an amateur juggler, and he told me how throughout history it's been a dream of jugglers to make it appear as though the balls were suspended motionless in air. Well, guess what? In space, you can make it happen for real. And this is my flying carpet. It's not a trick photograph. Not a trick photograph. It's the real thing. And then there are those moments outside in a spacesuit where I'll just never forget. Here I am. This is working on the Hubble Space Telescope. We're about 400 miles above the Earth, and so there you are, just floating all alone between heaven and earth, and it's absolutely an extraordinary experience, something that I'll never forget. But just like a mountain climbing, you can't stay on the summit forever, and we can't, at least right now, nobody stays in space forever. We do want to come home, and so at the end of the mission, we turn our spaceship backwards and we fire our rockets to slow ourselves down just enough so that our orbit gets smaller and comes down into the upper reaches of our atmosphere, and then the friction of the atmosphere actually slows us down but makes us glow red hot. So this is a picture taken from Houston, one when the space shuttle was flying overhead. And when you're inside and you look out the windows, it's like you're surrounded by fire outside. This is an extraordinary picture taken actually from the space station and you can see the trail of the shuttle as it was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And when you look out the back window, you can actually see the wake. You know, if you're in a motorboat, behind the motorboat it leaves a wake. Well, a space shuttle coming through the atmosphere leaves a wake, only here the wake is made of 3,000 degree hot gas, and it's just a visually spectacular experience. Doesn't last very long. Within about a half hour, we're in the sky over the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, coming in for a landing, and there we are. And of course, as I said, the space shuttles are now retired. You can see them in aerospace museums in Washington, D.C., at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, out at the Science Museum in Los Angeles, and at the Intrepid Aircraft Museum in New York City. So that's basically what it's like going into space. I just wanted to take 5 minutes, and I want to have a little time for questions at the end, to show you a few of the things that are going on in the future. Because although we have retired the space shuttle, we do have some companies, private companies now, that are building rockets that NASA will then essentially rent, almost like renting you go to Avis or Hertz, rent a car, and NASA will rent these rockets in order to take astronauts into space. And this Dragon capsule has actually already been up to the International Space Station to deliver cargo several times. And what's extraordinary, it's landed, it's been recovered. And I just want to remind you, up until this point, only 3 organizations were ever capable of building space capsules the size of human beings that could be recovered after re-entry to the Earth. And that was the United States government, the Russian government, and the Chinese government. And now we have a private American company that has done this, so it's really quite extraordinary. And there's other companies that are getting involved, it's really extraordinary. We have a generation of billionaires who are space nuts. They're excited about Apollo. They're putting their own money, as well as NASA's money, into building spaceships. So we have Blue Origin, founded by Jeff Bezos, who did Amazon.com, got plenty of money, and he likes space. The Sierra Nevada company is building a winged vehicle. The Boeing company is getting involved in it. So we have all these different space capsule designs and different rocket designs. We have another person who is designing a private space hotel. Once SpaceX has the capability of launching paying citizens into space, then this will be launched, and there's actually a 50% scale model which has been up for several years and is doing very well. And in order to service all of these private rockets, all over the US, spaceports or private spaceports are being built. Probably the biggest one is out in Las Cruces, New Mexico, Spaceport USA. And here you see a picture of the spaceport, and flying overhead is Spaceship Two and White Knight 2, which are built by Richard Branson, you may have heard of, who is doing his Virgin Galactic, and he's hopefully, by the end of this year, is going to be offering flights where you'll get about 6 minutes in weightlessness of space for about $250,000. Not cheap. If you're a little bit taken aback by the prices, for a lot less money, there's a company in Spain and a company here in the US that are offering high-altitude balloon flights that will take you up into space for just a few tens of thousands of dollars. You'll have a great view. You'll be up above the atmosphere. You will not be weightless. If you want to be weightless, there's another private company which runs these roller coaster planes that NASA used to run, And I actually took one of my brothers for his 60th birthday, and he had a blast. He thought it was one of the greatest things he had ever done. If some of you are asking yourself, am I physically able to do this sort of thing? I'll show you one of our most famous passengers, Stephen Hawking. Hopefully all of you recognize. He said that these experiences of being weightless out of his wheelchair were the most extraordinary things that had happened to him in his entire life. You can just imagine what it's like for somebody who, for most of his life, has been unable to walk or even move a muscle to have the freedom of floating around. It was an extraordinary flight. If you want to find out more about this, you can look at Space Adventures. I don't work for them, by the way. I don't get any kickbacks, but a lot of people ask where can they learn more, and they have a good website. And I just want to finish looking ahead at what this might mean for NASA, because I'd still love to go back to the moon. I'd love to explore Mars. And what I hope is that if some of these private companies are successful and are able to build a customer base outside of NASA, that we might be able to support from the private sector a launch infrastructure, because NASA historically has spent about a third of its entire budget to maintain this infrastructure. And if instead that infrastructure were supported privately and NASA could buy the services at the marginal cost of operations, there would be a lot more money left for real exploration, which is what I'd really like to see NASA doing. So that, in a nutshell, is what spaceflight is like, how we get spaceships and the crews ready for flight, a little bit about what it's like when you actually get up into space, and a very brief look ahead at what spaceflight might be like over the next 10 or 20 years. So my last message to all of the young children here who raised your hand when you said that you would like to fly in space, work hard, because when we select astronauts, one of the things we look at is how well did you do in school? Did you learn your math and science and computers and foreign languages? Can you write well? And if you work hard and keep at it, then who knows? Maybe we'll see each other up in space someday. So with that, we have... We have about 5 minutes or so for questions. Maybe we could turn up the lights so that I can see. I see a question here. Please stand up and talk really loud, and I will repeat the questions. Yeah. What happens after we get back from space? Very interesting. Remember I told you that you don't have any sense of what's up or what's down. And so all of the organs inside our head, which normally help us keep our balance, they sort of readjust themselves when you're in space. And so when you get back, it's very hard to keep your balance. In fact, some people who get back can't even stand up and walk straight. And the other thing is, you kind of get used to things floating around. So for instance, if I'm using a pen, and then I want to reach down and get something to drink in space, I could just let go of it and the pen would float. I could get something to drink and then get my pen. And I did the same thing when I first came back after my first flight. I didn't realize that I was holding a fork to eat, and I went to pick up, and I just dropped the fork on the floor. So yeah, it's a little strange coming back, but after a few days, you feel pretty normal again. Yes. Stand up, please. Do your muscles hurt when you get back from space? When you're actually in space, it's almost like lying in bed all the time because you're floating, and so you're not exercising a lot. So yeah, your muscles can be a little bit stiff. When people spend 6 months up in space on the space station, they actually exercise every single day for a couple of hours. And so their muscles are actually in good shape when they get back. You have to exercise a lot when if you're going to be in space for a long time. Because you can imagine if you just lay in bed for 6 months, your muscles would waste away and you'd be in pretty bad shape when you got out. Yes? How realistic was gravity? Well, how many people here have seen Gravity, by the way? Okay, lots. The image of what it's like floating in space and seeing the Earth below you, I thought was spectacularly done. Technically, there were a lot of problems with it. You can't fly from the Hubble Space Telescope to the International Space Station. If you saw me getting out of a spacesuit like that, after I got out of my spacesuit, I'd be wearing a communications cap and long thermal underwear and booties, whereas when Sandra Bullock got out, she was just wearing a skimpy t-shirt and some, you know, it's the movies. Yes?
International Space.
How big is the International Space Station? It's pretty huge. In its longest dimension, it's about 150 yards, so 1.5 football fields. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's websites you can go on. If you just Google International Space Station visibility, you'll get either a NASA or another website. And when it flies right overhead, it's so big that when it reflects the sunlight, it's really bright. It's one of the brightest things in the sky. So it's worth looking up and seeing when it flies over. Yes? How long does it take to get used to floating around in space? Different for different people. I have to say, I got used to it pretty quickly. What people tend to do is they tend to move too fast. And you push yourself off the wall, and if you push hard, you'll start doing somersaults and going out of control. After a while, you learn to move slowly. So just a single fingertip push and you can sort of float gently. It's like being Superman. It's really cool. Yes? The hardest thing I had to do in space, well, the thing that when we were fixing the Hubble Space Telescope, I think the thing that we were most concerned about was that we might break something that wasn't already broken. There were a lot of things we had to fix, but the thing is, when you're in a spacesuit, you've got this big, bulky backpack on and a helmet on top of you, and you really can't see what's above you or what's behind you. And so we had to be really, really careful. You know, that was the thing we were most concerned about, was we didn't want to break anything that wasn't already broken. Something in the back there, yeah. Really loud. How fast does the spaceship go? 18,000 miles an hour. It goes around the entire Earth every 90 minutes. So in a 24-hour period, you see the sun rise 16 times and you see the sun set 16 times. So you can't live your life by the sun. It would go by much too fast. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I what? Do the planets and the stars look any different from a spaceship? I was an astronomer before I became an astronaut, so I spent a lot of time actually looking out the window at the stars and the planets. You can't see many more stars than you would from going out in the desert on a really clear night. But what is quite unusual is that you can start out on one of the nighttime parts of your orbit up in the north and see like the Northern Cross, and then 15 minutes later you're in the southern hemisphere and you see all the southern constellations, and that's kind of neat. Yes, way in the back. One or two more? Yes. The International Space Station, does it have gravity? No, it does not. And on purpose, because one of the things that we want to study is how to keep people healthy for a long time without gravity. If you spun the station around, you could make kind of an artificial gravity, but we purposely don't want to do that. Now, just a little bit behind, I think with the red hair, yeah. Can someone repeat the question, because I couldn't hear it? With a human spaceship, we've never flown over the poles, the North or the South Pole. We have lots of satellites that fly over Antarctica. The farthest north or south we go is about northern Canada or the southern part of South America. Yes. Is there anything weird? There's lots of things that are weird. That's what I was showing you. I mean, everything is different. Everything is different. There's no up, there's no down. You can't pour water from a bottle, so you have to drink all your water out of a bag. And I mean, life is very different in space. Yeah. Do you ever get lost in the space station? Well, they actually, it is possible because you have no sense of where is up or down. And so what they've done at every doorway, because you can go up, you can go right, you can left, you can go down. So they have a big sign with arrows saying, you know, this way to the European module, this way to the Japanese module, and so on. And that way you don't get lost. How are we doing on time? You tell me when we... All right, 2 more questions. Any? Yes. How do you exercise in space? Very good question. Obviously, lifting weights isn't going to do the trick, right? Because they don't weigh anything. In fact, there's a lot of funny movies about how you can do push-ups with just one finger, which you can't, of course, do on the ground. No, there's 2 kinds of exercises you have to do. The first is aerobic. That means running. And so you on a treadmill. And the thing is, in order to run on a treadmill, you have to wear a harness and then tie yourself down to the treadmill with elastic bungee cords. Otherwise, you'd just be floating and your feet wouldn't hit the ground. So that's the first. And then for muscle training, instead of lifting weights, they have to use kind of elastic cords, and you basically push against the cords. And so that's how you do your strength training. Yes, right there. Mm-hmm. Other than the space telescope, well, let's see. My first mission was designed to take up 2 commercial telecommunications satellites. It turned out that one of those satellites did not turn on properly, and so we had to do an emergency spacewalk to fix it. So that was pretty exciting. I made a mission where we essentially carried some telescopes up and turned the shuttle into an observatory. And then I made 2 missions where it was a very interesting experiment where we launched a satellite that stayed attached to the shuttle by a very thin cable that was about 12 miles long. So imagine I'm standing here in the shuttle, and there's this 12-mile-long cable going up and sort of disappearing into space, and on top of that was a satellite. I felt sort of like Jack and the Bean, looking up at the beanstalk, you know, and that was also pretty extraordinary. Well, last question, right on the aisle. Why did we not fly over the poles? We didn't have any special reason to do it, and the further north and south you go, the more fuel it takes, and so if you don't really have to do it, there's no reason to do it. That was a short question, so we'll take one last one. Yes. What was my favorite, lunch or launch? Lunch, like to eat? All right, for every, that's a good question to end on. One of the things, I told you how fluid goes up to your upper body, and your head gets kind of swollen. In fact, it's a great way of getting rid of wrinkles, I have to say, much better than Botox. I have some pictures to prove it. But the other thing is that it makes you feel like you have a little bit of sinus congestion, so you kind of lose your sense of smell. And given the fact that we don't take showers up there, that's probably a good thing. But it means that the food kind of loses some of its taste. And so one of my favorite foods, which I had every single day, was they have a special dehydrated shrimp cocktail. And the shrimp were nothing to speak of. I mean, dehydrating shrimp, and then you put them back, you know, you'd sort of turn your nose up if you got them in a restaurant. But they had a really hot horseradish sauce on it, and that sort of opened up your nasal passages and made the rest of your food taste a little better. So that was my favorite food. Okay, thanks. You've been a great audience. And I just want to remind everybody that there is going to be now